You open your eyes in the darkness, and immediately, you know, something has changed. The air itself feels different against your face. Sharp, biting, alive with a kind of cruelty you haven't felt in months. You draw a breath, and it hurts, just slightly, at the back of your throat. Cold. It's really cold. The kind that doesn't just touch your skin, but seems to reach inside you, wrapping around your bones like invisible fingers. You're lying on a sleeping platform, wrapped in whatever furs and woven blankets your family has managed to gather. Beside you, you can feel the warmth of your children, their small bodies pressed close. Their breath creates tiny clouds in the dim pre-dawn light, filtering through the gaps in the walls. Yes, gaps. Because your home, whether it's a timber longhouse in Bronze Age Scandinavia, a mud brick dwelling in ancient Mesopotamia, or a stone roundhouse in Celtic Britain, isn't sealed against the elements the way you might imagine. The cold finds its way in. It always does. You don't want to move. Movement means leaving this cocoon of shared warmth, this small pocket of survival you've created through the night. But you must, because winter has arrived, and winter doesn't care about your comfort. Winter doesn't negotiate. It simply is, and you must respond, or you will not see spring. This is the reality that every single one of your ancestors faced, going back thousands upon thousands of years. Before central heating, before insulated walls, before grocery stores and electric lights and all the invisible systems that keep you comfortable and safe, there was just this: humans and winter. An annual battle that lasted months and claimed lives with casual, brutal efficiency. Let me take you back, not to the grand halls of kings or the marble temples of empires, but to an ordinary dwelling in an ordinary village, where ordinary people faced the extraordinary challenge of surviving winter. Because for most of human history, winter wasn't a season of cozy sweaters and hot chocolate. It wasn't about holiday celebrations or picturesque snowfall. Winter was a test. Winter was a threat. Winter was, quite simply, terrifying. You swing your legs off the sleeping platform, and your feet touch the packed earth floor. It's like stepping onto ice. The cold shoots up through your legs, and you gasp despite yourself. You reach for your outer garments, layers of wool if you're fortunate, leather and fur if you're a hunter, whatever woven plant fibers you've managed to trade for if you're not. Nothing is quite warm enough. Nothing ever is. Across the single room of your home, you can see the fire pit. Last night, before sleep, you carefully banked the coals, covering them with ash to keep them smoldering through the darkness. Now you kneel beside it, your fingers stiff with cold, and begin the delicate work of coaxing flame back to life. Your hands shake slightly, not from fear, but from the temperature. It's perhaps 40 degrees inside your home. Outside, it's much what the fire catches, and you feel a wave of relief so profound it's almost painful. Another night survived. Another day has begun. But even as the flames grow, you're doing calculations in your head. How much wood do you have stored? How long will it last? How cold will this winter become? These questions aren't abstract they're survival mathematics, and every person in every ancient civilization knew them by heart. You look toward the corner where your family's food stores sit. Clay jars of grain, strings of dried fish or meat, baskets of root vegetables buried in sand to keep them from freezing. You counted everything at the harvest. You know, down to the last handful of barley, how much you have. You know how many mouths must eat from these stores. You know that if you miscalculated, if the winter lasts longer than expected, if someone gets sick and can't work, if any one of 100 things goes wrong, you might not make it to spring. This is where our journey begins. In this moment of first frost, first true cold, first genuine fear. Because to understand why winter was terrifying for ancient civilizations, we must understand it not as historians looking back, but as humans living through it. We must feel what they felt. Fear, determination, fragility, hope. And above all, we must understand that for them, winter wasn't just a season, it was a siege. Before we go deeper into this story, I want to say something. If you enjoy a calm history like this, stories you can learn from while you rest, then you're welcome to like the video and subscribe, only if it genuinely helps you. And if you feel like it, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Some people listen in the early hours, some at midday. It's always interesting to see where these quiet stories land. Now, let's begin. The days are shrinking. You've watched it happen slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. But now it's undeniable. The sun rises later each morning, a pale disk struggling up from the horizon as if reluctant to make the journey, and it sets earlier, slipping away in mid-afternoon, abandoning you to the long, cold darkness that stretches ahead like an endless tunnel. In summer, you worked from dawn until dusk, making the most of every precious hour of light. There were fields to tend, animals to care for, repairs to make, food to gather and preserve. Your days were full, exhausting, but there was always enough light to see by, enough warmth to keep your fingers nimble, enough time to accomplish what needed doing. Now, in the grip of winter, your world has contracted. You have perhaps 8 hours of usable daylight if you're fortunate, maybe 6. In the far north, even less. And those hours aren't the bright, warm hours of summer. This is thin light, grey light, the kind that barely penetrates the smoke-filled interior of your dwelling. You must make every moment count, because once the sun sets, your world becomes defined by the small circle of firelight, and everything beyond that circle is darkness. True darkness, not the darkness of a modern city, where streetlights glow and car headlamps sweep past and the ambient light pollution means you can always see something. This is absolute darkness, the kind that existed before electricity, before gas lamps, before anything except fire. When you step outside your home after sunset, you cannot see your hand in front of your face unless the moon is full and the sky is clear. And the moon is not always full. The sky is not always clear. Your ancestors understood something that most of us have forgotten. Darkness is dangerous. Not metaphorically, but actually, physically dangerous. Your ancestors understood something that most of us have forgotten. Darkness is dangerous. Not metaphorically, but actually, physically dangerous. In darkness, you cannot see the route that will trip you, the ice that will send you falling, the wolf's eyes watching from the tree line. In darkness, you cannot find your way home if you get lost. In darkness, you cannot work, cannot cook properly, cannot see if your children are safe or if something is wrong, so you live by the fire. The hearth becomes the center of existence, the heart of your home in the most literal sense. You keep it burning constantly, because letting it go out means not just cold, but blindness. Starting a fire from scratch in ancient times isn't like flicking a lighter or striking a match. It's hard work, friction fire with a bow drill, or striking flint against iron pyrite, or keeping a coal alive and nursing it into flame. In wet, cold conditions, it can take an hour or more. An hour of work with frozen fingers, an hour of your family sitting in darkness and cold, waiting. Some families keep a small oil lamp burning through the night, if they have oil to spare. A tiny flame floating in rendered animal fat, giving off just enough light to see shapes and shadows. But oil is precious. Every resource is precious in winter. So mostly you sleep through the darkness because there's nothing else to do. And sleeping means not using fuel, not using food, not using energy you'll need for tomorrow's survival. But here's what the darkness does to you, slowly, over weeks and months. It changes you. Your sleep becomes disrupted because humans aren't meant to sleep for 14 or 16 hours at a stretch. You wake in the middle of the long night, disoriented, not knowing if dawn is hours away or about to break. Your mood darkens along with the days. We know now about seasonal affective disorder, about how lack of sunlight affects serotonin production, but your ancestors only knew that winter made people strange, irritable, melancholy, desperate. And there's the fear, the deep, primal fear that the sun might not come back. We know that it will. We understand orbital mechanics and the tilt of the Earth's axis. We can predict the winter solstice down to the minute and know with absolute certainty that afterward the days will lengthen again. Your ancestors had no such certainty. They watched the sun weaken and retreat, day after day after day, and they wondered, what if this time it keeps going? What if this time the sun dies completely and we're left in eternal darkness and cold? This fear was so powerful, so universal, that nearly every ancient culture developed rituals around the winter solstice. The Romans had Saturnalia, a week of festivals and feasting to honor Saturn and encourage the sun's return. The Norse celebrated Yule, burning enormous logs and making offerings to ensure the sun would be reborn. In Neolithic Ireland, people built New Grange, a massive stone monument aligned so precisely that on the winter solstice, and only on that day, sunlight penetrates deep into the inner chamber, a shaft of light in the darkness like a promise kept. These weren't quaint traditions or charming folklore. These were desperate attempts to maintain hope, to impose meaning on a terror that was all too real, because if the sun didn't return, everyone would die. It was that no crops, no warmth, no life. So you count the days. You mark them somehow, notches on a stick, knots in a rope, stones moved from one pile to another. You watch for the solstice, that turning point, that moment when the sun stops its retreat and begins, almost imperceptibly, to come back. And when it does, when the days start to lengthen by a minute or two, you feel something like joy, mixed with exhaustion and the knowledge that the hardest part of winter still lies ahead, because even as the light returns, the cold deepens. The worst of winter comes after the solstice, in those dark months when your food stores are half gone and the bitter winds blow, and every morning feels like a small miracle of survival. But for now, at this moment, you're still shortening days, still watching the light fade earlier and earlier, still wondering how you'll endure the darkness that's coming. Have you ever thought about how darkness shaped ancient fears? Drop a comment about what scares you most about the dark. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You remember the harvest? Of course you do. It was only a few months ago, but it feels like a lifetime. Those frantic, back-breaking weeks when everyone in the village worked from first light until they could no longer see, bringing in the grain, digging the root vegetables, preserving everything that could be preserved. Your hands were raw and bleeding. Your back screamed with pain. But there was a kind of joy in it, too, because the harvest meant survival. The harvest meant you had a chance. You counted everything. Every sheaf of wheat, every basket of barley, every string of onions hung from the rafters, every turnip buried in sand, every salted fish stacked in the storage pit. You did the mathematics in your head, over and over. So many people, so many mouths to feed, so many days until spring, when the first wild greens would appear, and the hens would start laying again, and the world would come back to life. The calculations were simple, brutal, and absolutely necessary. If you had enough, you would live. If you didn't, some of you wouldn't see spring. There was no grocery store to run to, no delivery service, no safety net of any kind. What you had stored was what you had, period. And now, weeks into winter, you're beginning to understand whether you calculated correctly or not. At first, the rationing wasn't obvious. You're still eating reasonably well, porridge in the morning, maybe some bread, a thin soup or stew in the evening with actual pieces of meat or fish in it. Not abundant, but adequate. Enough to keep you working, keep you warm, keep hunger at bay. But you're careful. Every portion is measured. Nothing is wasted. The crusts of bread are saved and soaked in water to make them edible again. Bones are boiled and reboiled until they give up every last bit of flavor and nutrition. Fat, which you crave desperately in the cold, is hoarded like gold. As winter deepens, so does the hunger. It doesn't come all at once like a wave crashing over you. It comes slowly, incrementally, a gradual tightening of the belt that you almost don't notice at first. The portions get smaller, the porridge gets thinner, more water and less grain. The evening soup becomes more liquid than solid, a few vegetables floating in broth that's been stretched as far as it will go. You start to feel it in your body, a hollowness, a constant low-level ache in your belly that never quite goes away. Your children ask for more, and you have to say no. That might be the hardest part. Looking into their hungry faces and explaining that this is all there is, that we must make it last, that spring is still so far away. You give them your portion sometimes, when they're not looking. You tell yourself you're not that hungry anyway. You lie. Different civilizations approached this problem in different ways, each adapting to their environment and resources. In Scandinavia, fish was everything. Dried cod that became hard as wood, preserved in the cold, dry air, reconstituted in water and stretched across months. In the Mediterranean regions, olive oil and grain stored in massive clay vessels called pithoi. In Mesopotamia, elaborate grain storage systems with clay seals to prevent theft and spoilage. Among the plains peoples of North America, pemmican, dried meat pounded with fat and berries, calorie-dense and long-lasting, carried through the cold months. But no matter how clever the preservation methods, no matter how carefully planned the stores, there was always the same problem. Food ran out before winter did. Always. The late winter months had names that reflected this reality. The hunger moon, the starving time. The weeks when you scraped the bottom of storage jars and found nothing but dust and mouse droppings. You become obsessed with food. You dream about it at night, elaborate fantasies of summer abundance, ripe fruit, fresh bread, meat dripping with fat. You wake up with your mouth watering and your stomach cramping with disappointment. During the day, food is all anyone talks about. What's left? How to stretch it further? Whether the chickens are still laying? Whether it's worth killing one of the animals now? Whether anyone has seen signs of early spring yet? Hunger changes you. It slows you down, saps your strength, makes every task feel monumental. Chopping wood becomes exhausting. Walking to check on the animals leaves you breathless. Your thinking gets foggy, your reactions slower. This is your body trying to conserve energy, trying to make what little fuel you're giving it last as long as possible. But it also makes you vulnerable to cold, to disease, to accidents, to all the other threats that winter brings. And there are choices to make. Terrible choices. Do you feed the elderly grandmother the same portion as the young man who must go out in the cold to hunt or gather firewood? Do you give extra to the pregnant woman or to the toddler? Or do you distribute everything equally and watch everyone weaken together? Some families made these decisions communally. Some left it to the eldest. Some tried not to make them at all and suffered for it. In some cultures, the elderly would simply walk out into the winter snow when food became too scarce, sacrificing themselves so the younger generations would have a better chance. In others, families would split up, with some members going to stay with distant relatives in hopes that spreading out would ease the burden on everyone. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes people left and were never seen again. You learn to recognize the signs of serious starvation in yourself and others. Some people don't make it. Every winter claims lives, and hunger is often the underlying cause, even when the immediate cause is something else. A cold, a disease, an accident. Because hunger weakens everything. It makes you vulnerable to every other threat winter throws at you. It's the foundation upon which all the other terrors are built, and so you calculate. You stretch every mouthful as far as it will go. You teach your children to be grateful for their thin porridge and not to ask for more. You try not to think about how many weeks of winter still remain. You watch your stores dwindle and pray to whatever gods your people believe in that you've calculated correctly, that spring will come before the last jar is empty. Because if it doesn't, the hunger that's merely painful now will become something else entirely, something that no one survives. Hunger weakens your body, making you vulnerable to every threat that winter holds. And the next challenge, the one that stalks you day and night, is perhaps the most immediate and brutal of all, the cold itself, relentless and deadly. There's a moment, usually in the depth of night, when you wake up shivering so violently that your whole body shakes. The fire has burned down to embers, the temperature inside your home has dropped dangerously low, and you realize, with a clarity that cuts through your sleep-fogged mind, that cold isn't just discomfort. Cold is a predator. The cold is hunting you. You stumble from your sleeping platform, your body stiff and aching, and feed the fire with trembling hands. The wood catches slowly, too slowly, and you huddle as close as you dare, desperate for warmth. Your teeth chatter. Your fingers are so numb you can barely grip the firewood, and you think, this is inside the shelter we built, with walls and a roof and a fire burning. What must it be like out there, in the true cold? You know what you've been out there. You have to go out there every single day, no matter how brutal the cold becomes. Because the animals need tending, and the wood needs gathering, and water needs to be fetched from the stream or well, and 100 other tasks can't wait just because your fingers are turning white and losing feeling. The clothing you wear is everything you have. Layers of wool if you're fortunate enough to keep sheep, leather and fur if you hunt, woven plant fibers if you're poor. None of it is quite adequate. Water-resistant wool is good, but when it gets wet, it becomes heavy and takes forever to dry, and wet wool against your skin will kill you faster than no wool at all. Leather is wind-resistant but stiff in the cold. Fur is warm but precious, reserved for the most brutal days or the most important people. Your hands and feet suffer most. You wrap them in whatever you can. Cloth, leather scraps, fur if you have it, but it's never enough. After an hour outside in a severe cold, you can't feel your toes anymore. Your fingers stop working properly, becoming clumsy and useless. You've seen what happens when it goes too far. You've seen the blackened fingertips and toes, the dead flesh that turns gangrenous, the amputations performed with heated knives and prayers that infection won't set in. Frostbite was so common in ancient winter communities that nearly everyone bore its scars. A missing toe here, a shortened finger there, an ear damaged by freezing. These weren't dramatic injuries from single catastrophic events. They were the accumulated cost of winter, the price paid in flesh for survival. And then there's the constant battle for fuel. Keeping warm isn't passive. It's active, exhausting work that never ends. Every day someone must go out and gather more wood or cut peat or collect dried dung for burning. In forested areas, this means venturing into the winter woods with an axe, your breath hanging in clouds, your hands blistering and bleeding as you chop and haul. The work keeps you warm while you're doing it, but the moment you stop, the cold rushes back in. In treeless regions, the steppes, the plains, the Arctic tundra, fuel is even more precious. Dried animal dung becomes your primary heat source, carefully collected and stored through the warmer months. Peat cut from bogs and dried through summer, whatever burns, whatever produces heat, becomes worth its weight in survival. And when fuel runs low, which it often does, you burn anything, furniture, tools you can spare, even part of your dwelling structure in the most desperate times. The fire itself is a tyrant. It must be fed constantly, day and night. Someone must wake every few hours through the long winter nights to add fuel to ensure it doesn't go out. Because if it does go out, if the fire dies while everyone sleeps, you might wake to find the weakest members of your family, the infants, the elderly, cold and still beside you. It happened. It happened more often than anyone wants to remember. Inside your dwelling, you do everything possible to preserve heat. Multiple families might crowd into a single structure, sharing body warmth and combining fires. In many cultures, animals lived inside during winter: goats, sheep, even cattle, because their body heat helped keep everyone alive. Yes, it meant living with the smell, the noise, the mess, but it also meant survival. The pragmatic choice was always the one that kept you breathing until spring. You sleep in layers, often fully clothed, piled together with your family under every fur, blanket and hide you possess. The very old and very young sleep in the middle, surrounded by the warmth of adult bodies. Even so, you wake in the morning to find frost on the inside walls of your home. Your breath has frozen there overnight, a visible reminder that the barrier between you and the killing cold outside is thin, so desperately thin. Children are especially vulnerable. Their small bodies lose heat faster than adults. You've wrapped them as best you can, but still you check on them constantly, through the night, touching their skin to make sure they're warm enough, pulling them closer, giving them your own warmth even as you feel your body temperature dropping. Some children don't make it through winter, not because their parents didn't love them or try their best, but because sometimes trying isn't enough. Sometimes the cold simply wins. The elderly face their own particular cruelty. Circulation would the ability to generate body heat diminishes. You watch your grandmother, who survived 60 winters before this one, growing weaker. She can't get warm anymore, no matter how close she sits to the fire. She's always cold now, always shivering, and you know what this means. You've seen it before. Winter takes the old first, usually. It's almost merciful in its predictability. And every year there are those who don't come back from trips outside. A hunter who went out in what seemed like a manageable cold and never returned, found frozen days later just a mile from home. A child who wandered too far from the dwelling and got disoriented in blowing snow. A woman who fell through ice while fetching water. The cold doesn't announce itself with drama. It just slowly, quietly, steals the warmth from your body until you sit down to rest for a moment and never get up again. If you're enjoying this journey through history, consider subscribing. We explore these forgotten human experiences every week. There are so many stories left to tell, so many lives that deserve to be remembered. But the cold, terrible as it is, isn't the only threat you face. Because you are weakened by hunger and cold, your body becomes vulnerable to something even more insidious. Something that spreads through your crowded winter dwelling like an invisible poison. You hear the cough first. It's your youngest child, the one who was fine yesterday, who ate her thin porridge and played quietly by the fire like always. But this morning, there's a cough. Just a small one at first. Almost nothing. You tell yourself it's just the smoke from the fire, just the cold air, just something that will pass. But you know better. You've lived through enough winters to recognize that sound. And you feel your heart sink with a dread that's worse than hunger, worse than cold. Because sickness in winter is different. Sickness in winter, within a day, the cough got worse. Your daughter's forehead burns with fever even as she shivers and complains of being cold. Her breathing sounds wrong, wet, rattling, labored. You do everything you know how to do. You brew tea from herbs you dried last summer. Yarrow, elderflower, whatever the healers in your community say might help. You keep her warm, keep her by the fire, spoon warm broth into her mouth even though she doesn't want it, and you pray. You pray harder than you've ever prayed for anything. But here's the terrible truth about winter illness in ancient times. There was almost nothing you could do. No antibiotics, no understanding of germs or viruses or how disease actually spreads. No hospitals, no doctors with real medical knowledge, just folk remedies passed down through generations, some helpful, many useless, all employed with desperate hope because hope was all you had. The conditions inside your winter dwelling create a perfect breeding ground for disease. Think about it. You're sealed inside a small space with your entire family. Maybe 10 or 12 people, possibly some animals too. The walls are packed with mud or moss or whatever you could find to keep out the wind, which means there's almost no ventilation. The air is thick with smoke from the fire that burns constantly. Everyone is weakened by hunger and cold. You watch your daughter struggle to breathe. Her lips are turning bluish. Her chest heaves with the effort of drawing air into lungs filled with fluid. You hold her, rock her, whisper comfort, even as terror claws at your throat. Your other children watch with wide, frightened eyes. Your partner paces, helpless, angry at their own uselessness, and all you can do is wait and hope, and keep her as comfortable as possible while her small body fights a battle it might not win. Dysentery was another winter killer, caused by contaminated water or spoiled food from storage. In summer, you had fresh water flowing in streams. In winter, you might be breaking ice to get water, or using water stored in containers all winter, or melting snow, and any of these could be contaminated. The cramping, the fever, the bloody flux that left people dehydrated and weak. Without modern understanding of electrolyte replacement or IV fluids, people simply wasted away, too weak to even lift their heads. You've stored water in clay vessels since the stream froze over. You boil it when you have fuel to spare, because the old women say it's safer that way, though no one knows why. But fuel is precious, and sometimes you don't boil it. Sometimes you take the risk because you need that fuel for warmth, for cooking the meager food you have. Every decision is a gamble. Every choice might be the one that kills some. The healer comes, if your village has one. If the snow isn't too deep for them to travel, they examine your daughter with practiced hands, feel her forehead, listen to her breathing. They might make a poultice of herbs to put on her chest. They might bleed her if they follow those practices, believing bad blood needs to be released. They might perform rituals, invoke gods or spirits, do everything their training and tradition have taught them. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. Too often, it doesn't. You lose track of days. Time becomes measured in your daughter's breathing, better or worse, stronger or weaker. The rest of the family moves quietly, speaking in whispers, as if noise itself might tip the balance. You don't sleep. You can't sleep. You sit beside her through the long winter nights, feeding the fire, bathing her forehead with cool water when the fever spikes, warming her when she shakes with chills, and then, maybe, if you're fortunate, the fever breaks. Her breathing eases. Color returns to her face. She asks for water, for food, and you weep with relief so intense it's almost painful. You've won this time. This time, your child will live. But you know others in the village haven't been so lucky. You hear the wailing from other homes, the sounds of grief that are so common in winter. Every family loses someone, eventually. Every winter takes its toll. Some illnesses you don't recover from. Tuberculosis, which the ancients called consumption, literally consumed people over months or years. The chronic cough, the weight loss, the blood in sputum, the slow fade into death. Smallpox, when it appeared, killed or scarred entire communities. Measles swept through populations that had no immunity. And always the vulnerable suffered most. Infants whose immune systems weren't developed, elderly whose bodies couldn't fight anymore, anyone already weakened by hunger or cold or previous illness. The psychological toll was perhaps as brutal as the physical. The helplessness of watching loved ones suffer and being unable to ease their pain. The guilt when you survived and others didn't. The fear that the exhaustion of constant vigilance, constant worry, constant grief. Winter didn't just threaten your body. It wore away at your spirit, your hope, your will to endure. But even beyond the sickness, even beyond the immediate suffering within your walls, winter brought another kind of torture, one that pressed in from all sides, invisible but suffocating. The isolation, the sense of being utterly, completely alone in the world. The last trader came through 6 weeks ago, maybe 7, you've lost count. He brought news from the next valley. Someone's daughter had married. The harvest had been good in the southern villages. There were rumors of raiders moving along the coast. Ordinary news. The kind you normally wouldn't pay much attention to, but you listened to every word like it was precious, because you knew this might be the last human voice from outside your village that you'd hear until spring. Now the roads are impassable. Snow has drifted higher than a person's head in some places. Even the animal trails through the forest are buried. The river, which in warmer months connected your village to the wider world, is frozen solid. A highway in theory, but treacherous in practice, with hidden weak spots that could plunge you through the ice into water so cold that death comes in minutes. You are trapped. Your village is an island, cut off from everything and everyone beyond its boundaries. In our modern world, isolation is a choice, often temporary and never complete. You can call someone, send a message, get in a car, and drive to see another human face. Help is available, usually quickly. Information flows constantly. But in ancient winter, isolation was absolute. No phones, no internet, no postal service, no roads. No way in, no way out. Whatever and whoever you had in your village was all you had, and all you would have until the thaw. At first, perhaps, there's something almost peaceful about it. The frantic pace of autumn is over. The visitors and travelers have stopped coming. Life settles into a slower rhythm. The daily routines of survival, the quiet evenings by the fire, the sense of your community drawing inward and close. It feels almost cozy, like pulling a blanket tight around your... You think about this at night, lying awake while the wind howls outside. What if the storage pit collapses and all your grain is ruined? What if the livestock sicken and die? What if the spring comes late this year, later than anyone can remember? These aren't abstract worries. They're real possibilities, and the isolation means they could become death sentences with no appeal, no rescue, no second chances. The isolation affects different people differently. Some withdraw into themselves, becoming quiet and distant, speaking less and less as the winter drags on. Others become clingy, desperate for human contact and conversation, talking endlessly about nothing just to hear voices. Children, but as weeks turn into months, something changes. The same faces every day. The same conversations repeated until everyone knows everyone else's stories by heart. The same four walls, the same smoky interior, the same narrow patch of frozen ground outside. The world shrinks down to just this: your village, your family, this small circle of existence with nothing beyond it. And slowly, almost without noticing, it begins to press in on you. Cabin fever, we call it now. Your ancestors just knew it as the winter madness, the restlessness and irritability that made people strange. Tempers fray. In the close quarters of winter dwellings, with multiple families crowded together, with no privacy, no escape, no way to take a break from each other, every small annoyance becomes magnified. Someone chews too loudly, someone's child cries too much. Someone took more than their share of firewood. Disputes that would be minor in summer become serious conflicts when there's nowhere to get away, no neutral party to mediate, no option except to somehow live together or face even worse consequences. You heard stories of villages that tore themselves apart during long winters, feuds that turned violent, people driven out into the snow over arguments that seem ridiculous in retrospect. The isolation does something to people's minds. Strips away the social niceties that help communities function, leaves raw nerves and short fuses and the constant grinding pressure of being unable to escape. And there's the fear that comes with isolation. The knowledge that if something goes wrong, really wrong, there's no help coming. If someone gets badly injured, there's no surgeon to call. If your food stores run out, there's no market to buy more. If raiders come, there's no neighboring village to send aid. If disease sweeps through, there's no doctor, no medicine, no hospital. You are utterly, completely on your own. Who were playful in autumn become listless or irritable. Old people sometimes seem to just give up, as if the isolation has severed their last connection to the will to live. There's no news from the outside world. No way to know if other villages are surviving, if your relatives in distant places are well, if anything of importance has happened. Kingdoms could rise or fall. Wars could be won or lost. Disasters could strike neighboring regions and you wouldn't know. You're living in a bubble, disconnected from the flow of history, suspended in time with only your small circle of familiar faces. Some cultures adapted to this better than others. The Norse, living through months of darkness and isolation, developed strong storytelling traditions, the long sagas recited around winter fires, the skaldic poetry, the passing down of histories and myths that served not just to entertain but to bind communities together and remind them they were part of something larger. In other regions, winter was a time for crafts that couldn't be done during the busy seasons: weaving, carving, tool making, work that kept hands and minds occupied. But even in cultures with strong winter traditions, the isolation took its toll. You can see it in your neighbors' faces as winter stretches on, the hollow look in their eyes, the way conversations become forced and flat, the way even laughter sounds strained. Everyone is counting the days until spring, until the ice breaks and the roads open, and the blessed relief of new faces, new stories, new connections to the world beyond this frozen prison. You stand outside sometimes, despite the cold, just to feel space around you. You look toward the horizon, toward where you know the path lies that leads to other valleys, other villages. It's buried under snow now, impassable, but you look anyway. And you wonder if the people on the other side are looking back, equally trapped, equally desperate for the isolation to end. Because humans aren't meant for this. We're social creatures, meant to move and trade and mix and connect. The isolation of winter went against something fundamental in human nature, made you feel less than fully human, reduced to just survival, just endurance, just waiting. And while you wait, trapped and isolated, there are other threats prowling at the edges of your awareness. Threats that the winter darkness conceals. Threats that the isolation makes even more terrifying because you know, if they come, you face them alone. But even in cultures with strong winter traditions, the isolation took its toll. You can see it in your neighbors' faces as winter stretches on, the hollow look in their eyes, the way conversations become forced and flat, the way even laughter sounds strained. Everyone is counting the days until spring, until the ice breaks and the roads open, and the blessed relief of new faces, new stories, new connections to the world beyond this frozen prison. You stand outside sometimes, despite the cold, just to feel space around you. You look toward the horizon, toward where you know the path lies that leads to other valleys, other villages. It's buried under snow now, impassable, but you look anyway. And you wonder if the people on the other side are looking back, equally trapped, equally desperate for the isolation to end. Because humans aren't meant for this. We're social creatures, meant to move and trade and mix and connect. The isolation of winter went against something fundamental in human nature, made you feel less than fully human, reduced to just survival, just endurance, just waiting. And while you wait, trapped and isolated, there are other threats prowling at the edges of your awareness. Threats that the winter darkness conceals. Threats that the isolation makes even more terrifying because you know, if they come, you face them alone. You hear it in the middle of the night, a sound that jerks you instantly awake, your heart already pounding before your conscious mind even registers what woke you. It's coming from outside, beyond the walls. A howl. Long, mournful, closer than you'd like. Then another answers it, and another, until the darkness seems filled with voices. Wolves. And they're hungry. Winter drives everything to desperation. Not just you. The wolves that normally keep to the deep forest are venturing closer to human settlements now, drawn by the smell of livestock, the possibility of scavenging, the same primal need for food that drives all living things. Their normal prey, deer, elk, and smaller animals, have either migrated to better feeding grounds or are scarce and hard to catch in deep snow. So the wolves come to where the food is, to where you are. You lie still, listening. Your livestock, if you have any, are in a shelter attached to your dwelling or inside with you, precisely because of nights like this. You've heard the stories. Everyone has. The winter 2 generations ago when wolves broke into a poorly secured shed and slaughtered an entire flock of sheep. The child who wandered too far from home at dusk and was found the next morning, or what was left of her. The hunter who never returned, his blood trail in the snow telling the story of his final moments. Wolves aren't the only predators emboldened by winter's hunger. Bears, if they haven't denned properly or if something disturbed their hibernation, become especially dangerous, disoriented, starving, aggressive. Lynx and wildcats, normally shy of humans, will take risks they wouldn't dare in summer. Even smaller predators like foxes, normally more scavenger than threat, become bold enough to snatch chickens or raid food stores if they find a way in. Your dwelling isn't a fortress. The walls are sturdy enough to keep out wind and most of the cold. but a determined predator could break through if it really tried, especially the doors, which are often just hide or wood with simple latches, so you keep the fire burning near the entrance. Predators fear fire. It's one of humanity's oldest defenses, light and heat, to keep the darkness and its dangers at bay. But fire requires fuel, and fuel is always running low, and some nights you have to choose between warmth inside and safety from what's outside. During the day, venturing beyond the village boundaries becomes its own calculated risk. You need to check trap lines if you've set them. You need to gather firewood from wherever you can still find it. Sometimes you need to hunt, because fresh meat, any meat, would be such a relief from the monotonous stored foods. But every step into the winter wilderness is dangerous. The snow hides pitfalls, fallen branches, ice-covered streams. You could break through into freezing water. You could slip and break a bone. And with no way to set it properly, that could mean death from infection or simply being unable to work, unable to contribute to your family's survival. And then there are the human threats. Because winter makes predators of men too. In some cultures, winter raiding was an established practice. Warriors who would strike at neighboring villages when they were most vulnerable, food stores depleted, people weakened by hunger and cold, no possibility of reinforcements or escape. Take what you need to survive. Take what will ensure your people make it to spring, even if it means others won't. The logic was brutal but simple. Better them than us. Better to raid a neighbor's stores than watch your own children starve. Better to strike first than be struck. And winter provided cover. The darkness, the isolation, the knowledge that there would be no pursuit through impassable snow, no justice until spring at the earliest, if ever. You've reinforced your doors as best you can. You take turns keeping watch through the night. Someone always awake, always listening. Because raiders come quietly, in the darkest hours before dawn, when sleep is deepest and resistance slowest. They know exactly what they're looking for. Food, fuel, anything valuable that can be carried away. Sometimes they take people too, women, children, anyone who might be useful as slaves or hostages. The fear of it never leaves you. Every unexpected sound makes you freeze, listening. Every dog's bark in the night sets your pulse racing. Is it just an animal passing by? Or is it something worse? The not knowing is its own torture. The constant vigilance, the inability to ever fully relax, the knowledge that your survival might depend on hearing the warning signs in time to respond. Some villages posted sentries, even in the worst weather. Someone had to stand in the freezing darkness, watching, listening, ready to raise the alarm. It was a miserable duty, dangerous duty. You could freeze at your post if you weren't careful, but necessary. Because the alternative was waking up to find raiders already inside your defenses, already among you. Even traveling between dwellings within your own village became risky on the darkest nights. You couldn't see where you were going. You could get disoriented in blowing snow and lose your way between buildings you'd lived among your entire life. People froze to death 20 feet from their own doors because they got turned around in a whiteout and walked the wrong direction. The winter world beyond your walls wasn't empty wilderness. It was filled with threats, both animal and human, all driven by the same desperate mathematics of survival. And every night when you barred your door and banked your fire and tried to sleep, you knew those threats were out there in the darkness, waiting, watching, hungry. But humans are stubborn creatures. Faced with all these horrors, the darkness, the hunger, the cold, the sickness, the isolation, the predators, your ancestors didn't simply endure. They found ways to push back, to create meaning and hope in the midst of terror. They developed rituals and traditions that help them survive not just physically, but psychologically and spiritually. Tonight is special. You can feel it in the air, sense it in the way people move with slightly more energy despite their exhaustion and hunger. Tonight is the solstice, or near enough the longest night, the turning point. The moment when the sun stops its terrifying retreat and begins, however imperceptibly, to return. And tonight, your community will gather to mark this moment, to push back against the darkness, not with weapons or walls, but with light and hope and the stubborn insistence that you will survive. You've been preparing for days. What little extra food could be spared has been saved for tonight's feast, and it will be a feast by winter standards. Even if summer, you would find it meager. There will be a fire, larger than usual, fed with wood that's been hoarded specifically for this purpose. There will be songs. There will be stories. There will be the comfort of gathering together and remembering that you're not just individuals struggling alone, but a community, bound by shared struggle and shared determination. This is how humans survived winter, psychologically and spiritually. not just by storing grain and preserving meat, but by creating rituals that gave meaning to the suffering, that transformed the darkest time of year into something sacred, rather than simply terrible. Every culture did this differently, but the impulse was universal to make winter mean something beyond mere endurance. The Romans had Saturnalia, a week of festivities in late December where social norms were temporarily inverted, where masters might serve slaves, where gifts were exchanged, where feasting and merriment were not just permitted, but required. It was a release valve for the pressure of winter, a deliberate injection of joy and chaos into the season's grinding hardship. For a few days, you could forget your hunger, your fear, your exhaustion, and simply be human in the fullest sense, laughing, singing, celebrating life in the face of death. In Norse tradition, Yule lasted for 12 days. The Yule log, carefully selected and brought inside, would burn throughout the festival as a symbol of the sun's endurance, a promise of light and warmth continuing. Oaths were sworn over this fire, sacrifices were made to the... Stories were told of heroes and monsters, of the eternal battle between order and chaos, light and darkness. The sagas kept you connected to your history, reminded you that your ancestors had survived winters just as brutal, that you came from a long line of survivors. You gather now with your neighbors, crowding into the largest dwelling or around a central fire if the weather permits. Children who've been listless for weeks suddenly have energy, excited by the break in routine, by the promise of extra food and adult attention. The elderly, wrapped in their best furs, hold places of honor closest to the fire, and someone begins to sing an old song, one everyone knows, about the return of light, about spring coming, about hope. The singing does something to you. It always does. Individual voices joining together, creating something larger than any one person could make alone. It's a reminder that you're not facing winter as isolated individuals, but as a collective, that your survival is bound up with everyone else's, that you're stronger together than apart. The harmony, imperfect, human, beautiful, pushes back against the howling wind outside. Someone tells a story. Maybe it's about how the world began, how the gods created light and warmth and life. Maybe it's about a great hero who faced impossible odds and triumphed. Maybe it's about your own people, your own ancestors, the winters they survived and the lessons they learned. The story isn't just entertainment, it's instruction, inspiration, connection. It's older people passing wisdom to younger ones. It's everyone remembering that this moment, this winter, this suffering, is part of a larger pattern, part of being human. In some cultures, winter was when the spirit world drew close, when the boundaries between the living and the dead grew thin. You might leave offerings for your ancestors, asking for their protection, their guidance. You might perform rituals to ward off malevolent spirits or invite benevolent ones. Whether you believe the spirits are real or not almost doesn't matter. The rituals themselves serve a purpose, giving you agency in a situation where you have little, creating a sense that you can influence your fate even when you feel powerless. There's laughter tonight, more than you've heard in weeks. Someone makes a joke, probably not even that funny, but everyone laughs anyway because laughter feels good, because it releases tension, because it's a small rebellion against the grimness that surrounds you. Children play games by the firelight. Young people flirt awkwardly, thinking about spring and weddings and futures that feel very far away but possible if you can just hold on. And there's music, if your community has instruments. Drums made from stretched hide, simple flutes carved from wood or bone, strings made from animal gut stretched across hollowed gourds. The music is repetitive, hypnotic, designed not for passive listening but for participation. You clap, you stamp your feet, you move your body despite the cold and hunger and exhaustion. The rhythm gets into your blood, makes you feel alive, reminds your body that it's not just a vehicle for suffering, but capable of joy, of movement, of being fully present in this moment. The feast, when it comes, isn't much, but it's been prepared with care. The precious stores have been opened, the carefully hoarded treats brought out. There's bread made with the last good grain. There's meat or fish, more than your usual meager portion. There might be something sweet, like honey if someone kept bees, dried fruit if any remains. Something to remind your tongue that life can be pleasant, that not everything is bland survival rations. You eat slowly, savoring every bite, knowing this abundance is temporary, that tomorrow you'll return to short rations and hunger. But for tonight, you let yourself feel satisfied. You let yourself believe that spring will come, that the worst is behind you, or at least manageable, that you and your loved ones will survive to see warm weather again. Someone proposes a toast to the returning sun, to the community's health, to those who didn't make it this far, to those still struggling, to hope for itself. You raise whatever cup or vessel you have, and you drink, and you feel part of something larger than yourself. This is how ancient people survived winter psychologically, not by denying the horror of it, not by pretending it wasn't as bad as it was, but by creating pockets of meaning and joy and connection within it, by refusing to let winter take everything, by insisting that even in the darkest times, there was still reason to sing, to laugh, to gather together, and remember what it meant to be human. The rituals couldn't keep you warm, they couldn't fill your belly or heal your sicknesses or protect you from predators. But they could give you something almost as necessary, the will to continue, the strength to face another day, the hope that enduring mattered. And now, as the fire burns low and people begin to drift back to their own dwellings, as the special night becomes just another winter night, you carry that hope with you. It's fragile. It might not survive the next crisis, the next loss, the next endless stretch of cold and dark and hunger. But for now, it's there. A small flame inside you, matching both must be tended carefully. Both must be protected. Both are necessary for survival. You notice it first in the quality of the light. Something has changed, something subtle that you can't quite name but feel in your bones. The sun, which for months has been a pale, distant thing, seems different today. Warmer, perhaps. Stronger. The shadows it casts don't look quite as harsh, and there's something in the air, not warmth, not yet, but the promise of warmth, the possibility of it. Then you hear it, a sound so ordinary, so simple, that in any other season you wouldn't even register it. But now, after months of silence, it stops you mid-step and brings tears to your eyes before you even understand why. Dripping, water dripping, the sound of ice melting, of snow beginning its slow transformation back into liquid, of winter's grip starting to loosen. You stand perfectly still, just listening to this small miracle, this song of survival. You've made it. Against all odds, through all the terror and suffering and loss, you've made it to the thaw. Not everyone is achingly aware of the empty spaces in your community, the faces you won't see again, the loved ones who couldn't hold on quite long enough. But you're here. You're alive, and the world is waking up. Over the next few days and weeks you watch winter. It doesn't happen all at once. There are false springs, days of warmth followed by bitter cold snaps that kill the early hopeful buds. The snow doesn't melt uniformly but in patches, revealing the brown earth beneath like promises being slowly fulfilled. The streams begin to flow again, their water ice cold but moving, alive, no longer frozen in silent stasis. And the birds return. You hear them before you see the first tentative songs after months of silence. The sound is so beautiful it hurts. These small creatures who flew to warmer lands while you endured are coming back. And if they're coming back, if they trust that the world can sustain life again, then perhaps you can trust it too. Perhaps the calculation you made back in autumn that you had enough, that you could survive, was correct after all. You venture outside more now, no longer driven by desperate necessity, but by something like joy. The air still bites, but it doesn't have that killing edge anymore. You can feel your body relaxing slightly, the constant tension of winter beginning to ease. Your shoulders drop from where they've been hunched up around your ears for months. You take a deep breath, a real breath, and it doesn't hurt. The first green shoots appear, wild onions, early grasses, the brave plants that push through the last patches of snow because they know, somehow, that it's time. You gather them reverently, these first fresh foods after months of preserved stores. The taste is indescribably sharp, alive, green in a way that has nothing to do with color and everything to do with vitality. It's like eating hope. Your community emerges blinking from winter's chrysalis. People who've been shuttered inside for months come out to see neighbors, to assess who made it and who didn't, to begin the work of spring. There's grieving to do, certainly. Empty homes to deal with, children orphaned, elders lost, the holes in the community's fabric that need mending. But there's also relief, reunion, the joy of survival. And slowly, the roads open again. The paths through the forest become passable. The frozen river thaws, sometimes with dramatic breaking of ice that sounds like thunder. The isolation that is pressed so heavily lifts, and the first travelers appear, traders with news from distant places, relatives coming to check on family, the blessed relief of new faces and new stories in connection to the wider world. Looking back on winter now, from the safety of spring, you can almost see it differently. Yes, it was terrible. Yes, you lost people you loved. Yes, there were nights you weren't, but you also saw things that only winter reveals. The strength of your community, the depth of human resilience, the fierce love that makes people share their last piece of bread with a hungry child. You saw what people are capable of, both the worst. Winter taught you things that summer never could. It taught you what truly matters, not possessions or status or pride, but warmth and food, and the faces of people you love. It taught you the value of preparation, of community, of the small comforts that make life bearable. It taught you that humans are simultaneously more fragile and more resilient than you ever imagined. And it connected you, across time and space, to every single human who has ever faced winter without the buffer of modern technology. Your great-great-great-grandparents knew these fears. So did theirs. So did ancestors going back 10,000 years, to the very beginning of human settlement in cold climates. The same cold, the same hunger, the same determination to survive until spring. You're part of an unbroken chain of survivors, and every one of them endured, so that you could exist. We've lost something, perhaps in our modern insulation from winter's reality. We've gained comfort and safety, which is good. No one should suffer the way your ancestors suffered if it can be avoided. But we've also lost the visceral understanding of our own strength, the knowledge that humans can endure almost anything if they must. We've lost the deep appreciation for simple things, warmth, food, light, and community that comes from knowing what it's like to live without them. As you settle in tonight, wherever you are, perhaps you'll think about those ancient people. Perhaps you'll spare a thought for a woman waking in the cold darkness, for a child going to bed hungry, for a community huddled together against the winter night. They were real. Their suffering was real. Their courage was real. And they survived so that eventually their endurance is written into your DNA. Their determination part of your inheritance. Every time you face something difficult, something that seems insurmountable, you carry their strength with you. The winter always ends, spring always comes. Not because we deserve it, or because we've earned it, but because that's the nature of the world's cycles of darkness and light, death and rebirth, suffering and joy. Ancient peoples understood this in their bones. They built their rituals and their hope around this knowledge. And they survive. If this kind of calm history helps you rest, you're welcome to subscribe only if it genuinely suits you. And if you'd like, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. I always enjoy reading them. You can also pick another video on the screen, something quiet, something slow, and just let it play while you drift off. Sleep well tonight. Sleep warm and safe and fed, luxuries that most humans throughout history could only dream of. And as you drift off, maybe whisper a small thank you to all those who came before, who endured the terror of winter so that you could exist to hear their story. The winter is over. Spring has come. Rest now. I'll see you in the next story.